The sign on the door of Elias Thorne, Curios and Esoterica, was perpetually askew, its faded gold leaf peeling like ancient skin. Inside, the air hung thick with the scent of aged paper, dust, and something faintly metallic, like old blood or forgotten brass. Elias, a man whose gray tweed suit seemed to have absorbed the very dust of his shop, squinted over his spectacles at the young woman who had just entered. She was Dr. Anya Sharma, an archivist from the British Museum, though her current disheveled appearance suggested she'd been living in a library's forgotten wing for weeks. Her dark hair was escaping its bun, and her eyes, usually sharp and analytical, held a frantic, desperate glint. "Mr. Thorne," Anya began, her voice a low, urgent whisper that seemed out of place in the silent shop. "I believe you were the last person to deal with Professor Alastair Finch before he disappeared." Elias slowly lowered the magnifying glass from the crumbling map he was examining. "Finch, you say?" "Ah, yes. A curious fellow, obsessed with time, or rather, the absence of it." He gestured vaguely to a cluttered shelf. "He came to me seeking something specific. A chronometer, but not one that merely measured time. He wanted one that could, shall we say, unmake it." Anya stepped closer, her gaze sweeping over the bizarre artifacts, shrunken heads, alchemical instruments, a clock made of petrified wood. He mentioned a device in his last frantic message, something he called the Chronos Dial. He said it wasn't a clock. It was a key to the forgotten hours. Elias chuckled, a dry, rustling sound like dead leaves. A poetic way of putting it. "I procured it for him, yes. A curious piece from a forgotten corner of the Ottoman Empire, made by a cult of temporal mystics who believed time was a cage. The dial, they said, could pick the lock. Where is it now?" Anya pressed, her voice trembling slightly. "The museum's records indicate Professor Finch was last seen entering the old Blackwood Estate, the one rumored to be unbound by time. His research notes mentioned using the dial there." Elias frowned, a rare flicker of genuine concern crossing his ancient face. "Blackwood Estate? A rather unstable locale. They say the very land itself forgets to follow the sun. I advised Finch against it. The dial isn't just a clock, Dr. Sharma. It's a lens. It doesn't just show you moments. It can pull them." "Pull them how?" "Imagine a film reel," Elias explained, tapping his long, bony finger on a dusty ledger. "We watch it from start to finish. But what if you could grab a single frame and live within it? Or worse, what if you could remove a frame entirely? Erase it from existence?" The Chronos Dial was designed for that. Anya shivered. Professor Finch was attempting to retrieve something he lost. His daughter. She disappeared from their home exactly 7 years ago to the day. He believed he could use the dial to go back, just to that moment, and find her. Elias sighed, a cloud of dust escaping his lips. A noble, if ultimately foolish, endeavor. Time, Dr. Sharma, is not merely a river. It is an ocean filled with currents, eddies, and terrifying creatures that feed on paradox. To disturb it is to invite unimaginable consequence. I suspect Professor Finch found this out the hard way. He sent me a coded message, Anya continued, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. It was covered in a series of obscure symbols and numbers. He called it a temporal anchor. He said if he failed, this would be the key to finding him, wherever or whenever he might be. Elias took the paper, his eyes, magnified by his thick lenses, scrutinizing the symbols. "Ah, the knot of hours. A very old method. It's not a location, Dr. Sharma. It's a frequency, a specific pulse in the fabric of time itself. To find him, you won't need a map. You'll need a way to tune into the past. And I fear the Blackwood Estate is the only place where the signal might still be strong enough." He looked up at Anya, his gaze suddenly piercing. "Are you truly prepared to step outside the flow, Dr. Sharma? To enter a place where yesterday might be tomorrow, and now is merely a suggestion?" Anya's jaw tightened. "I have to try. Professor Finch was my mentor. He was searching for his family, and he may have uncovered something far more dangerous. I need to know what that device did to him. Where can I find this estate?" Elias slowly rose from his chair, his bones cracking like dry wood. He pointed a long, trembling finger toward a faded, sepia-toned photograph on the wall. It showed a grand, decaying manor house shrouded in perpetual twilight, its windows like empty eyes. Blackwood, he whispered, the place where time itself goes to die. The drive to Blackwood Estate was a journey through shifting landscapes. As Anya's car wound through the coastal cliffs of Devon, the GPS began to glitch, the map spinning wildly as if the satellite couldn't decide which century she was in. The air turned cold, not the sharp cold of winter, but a stale, tomb-like chill. She found the gates at twilight. They were iron, rusted into the shape of weeping willow branches, and they didn't creak when she pushed them open. They were eerily silent. The manor loomed out of the fog, a Victorian monstrosity of gray stone and jagged gables. It didn't look abandoned, it looked stagnant. No birds flew over the roof, and the ivy on the walls wasn't green. It was a parched, skeletal brown, frozen in a state of decay. Anya stepped into the grand foyer. The air was heavy with the smell of ozone and old, wet wool. Her flashlight beam cut through the dark, landing on a massive grandfather clock in the center of the hall. It had no hands, just a smooth, polished brass face that reflected her own terrified expression. "Professor," she called out. Her voice didn't echo. It was swallowed instantly by the walls, as if the house was deaf. She moved deeper into the house, guided by the knot of hours symbols Finch had left her. She reached the library, a room that smelled intensely of Alastair Finch's pipe tobacco. On a heavy oak desk, she found his leather-bound journal. It was open to a page dated October 14th, 1924. Wait, Anya thought, her heart hammering. He disappeared in 2024. She read the entry. The dial is humming. I realized my mistake. It doesn't travel through time. It bleeds time. I am standing in the library, but I can hear the construction of the house in 1880, and I can hear the wind whistling through its ruins in 2150. Everything is happening at once. I see her, Anya. I see my daughter, Clara. She's in the hallway. But every time I step toward her, I age 10 years. I have to lock the frequency. Anya heard a soft click-clack sound. It was coming from the floorboards. She looked down and saw a pocket watch. Finch's watch, sliding across the floor toward the dark hallway. It wasn't being pulled by a string. It was moving as if the floor itself was tilted in a direction she couldn't see. She followed it. The hallway grew longer as she walked, the perspective warping. The doors she passed were blurrier than the walls, some appearing as mere outlines of light. At the end of the hall stood a figure, a small girl in a blue dress, her back turned. Clara, Anya whispered. The girl didn't turn. Instead, the girl's shadow grew rapidly, stretching across the ceiling until it reached Anya's feet. And then, the sound began. It wasn't a voice. It was the sound of 1,000 clocks ticking at different speeds, creating a cacophony that felt like physical pressure against Anya's skull. Suddenly, the girl vanished, and in her place stood a tall, thin man in a tattered lab coat. His face was a blur of motion, his features shifting rapidly between childhood, middle age, and a withered corpse. "Anya!" The man gasped. It was Alastair Finch, but his voice sounded like it was being played backwards. "Don't look at the dial." He pointed to the floor. There, nestled in a pile of salt and iron shavings, was the Chronos Dial. It was a golden orb, the size of a grapefruit, covered in interlocking rings that spun in opposite directions. It wasn't reflecting the light of her flashlight. It was inhaling it. The rings began to glow with a pale, violet light. Anya felt a sudden, sickening tug in her stomach, the same feeling as a fast-falling elevator. The walls of the hallway began to dissolve into a vortex of swirling dust and light. "Close your eyes," Finch screamed, his voice now sounding like a choir of 100 versions of himself. But Anya couldn't. She saw the rings of the dial align. In that moment, the library, the manor, and the year 2024 vanished. She was standing in a void of gray mist, and she could see thousands of frames of her own life floating around her like shards of broken glass. She saw herself as a child. She saw herself graduating, and she saw herself lying dead on the floor of the Blackwood Estate, her skin turned to dust. The gray mist felt like cold silk against Anya's skin. Around her, the frames of time continued to drift, shimmering two-dimensional planes of light. She reached out toward a frame of her 5-year-old self blowing out birthday candles, but her hand passed through it like smoke. "Don't touch them." Finch's voice echoed. He was standing a few yards away, but he looked like a long-exposure photograph, a blurred trail of himself across several seconds of movement. If you break a frame, that moment never happened. You'll unravel your own history. Anya pulled her hand back, her heart racing. "Alistair, what is this place? Where's the house?" "We are in the between," Finch explained, his image flickering. "The dial didn't just move us, it tore the fabric." The Blackwood Estate was built on a temporal fault line. The dial acted as a drill, and we've fallen into the shaft. He held up his hand. It was translucent. Through his palm, Anya could see the violet glow of the Chronos Dial, which hovered between them, its rings still spinning with silent, predatory grace. "I found Clara," Finch whispered, his voice cracking. "She didn't disappear 7 years ago. She was stolen by the Echo." "The Echo?" Anya asked, looking around the swirling gray void. "The house has a memory, Anya. A dark, sentient resonance. It feeds on the moments we discard, the regrets, the what-ifs. It took Clara because she was the center of my greatest regret, and now it's using her to lure me deeper into the center of the spiral." Suddenly, the gray mist turned a bruised, angry purple. The frames of Anya's life began to vibrate. One frame, a memory of her father's funeral, shattered with the sound of breaking crystal. Anya screamed as a sudden, agonizing pain flared in her mind. A memory was being erased. She struggled to remember her father's face, but it was slipping away, replaced by a terrifying, hollow static. "It's feeding," Finch yelled. "The Echo is consuming your timeline to stabilize itself." Out of the mist, a shape began to form. It wasn't human. It was a towering mass of clockwork gears, rotted timber, and human shadows. It had no face, only a massive, circular indentation where a clock face should be. In the center of its chest, trapped behind a cage of golden ribs, was the little girl in the blue dress. "Clara." The creature let out a sound like 1,000 rusted pendulums swinging at once. It lunged, its limbs, made of splintered wood and jagged brass, sweeping through the air. "Anya, the dial!" Finch shouted, thrusting the glowing orb toward her. "You have to reverse the pulse. It's the only way to eject us back into the present." "Ow!" Anya cried, catching the cold, vibrating sphere. "The symbols on your paper. The knot of hours. Look at the rings." Anya looked down at the dial. The interlocking rings were covered in the same jagged symbols from the professor's message. She realized they weren't just decorations, they were a combination. But as she reached to turn the rings, the creature, the Chronos Echo, roared. It slammed a massive, gear-toothed hand into the ground, sending a shockwave of distorted time through the mist. Anya was thrown backward. The dial slipped from her fingers, tumbling into the gray depths. "No," she screamed. As she watched the dial fall, she saw a frame of the future floating nearby. In it, she saw herself standing in the library of Blackwood Estate, holding a heavy iron hammer, smashing the Chronos Dial into pieces while the house burned around her. That hasn't happened yet, she thought. Or has it? In this place, the sequence was broken. If she wanted to survive, she couldn't just follow time. She had to jump over it. She dove after the falling dial, plummeting through the gray void toward the reaching claws of the Echo. The sensation of falling was not like a drop through air. It was like falling through liquid static. Every time Anya's body passed through a drifting frame, she felt a jolt of displaced emotion, a flash of childhood joy, a sting of teenage betrayal, the cold sweat of a nightmare. The Chronos Dial was just inches from her fingertips, its violet rings spinning so fast they blurred into a solid sphere of light. Below her, the Chronos Echo, the towering nightmare of gears and shadows, opened its hollow chest. The ribcage of brass widened, and Anya could see Clara inside, her eyes wide, staring not at Anya, but at a point in time years away. Anya! The center ring. Finch's voice was faint now, stretched thin by the distance of seconds. Align the knot. With a desperate lunging motion, Anya's fingers clamped onto the dial. The coldness of the metal was absolute, biting into her palms like dry ice. She ignored the pain and looked at the interlocking rings. The symbols were shifting. They weren't static markings. They were reactive. She saw the knot of hours, the central symbol from the professor's message. It was split across 3 different rings. She twisted the first ring. Click! A wave of sound hit her, the sound of a bell tolling in the distance. She twisted the second ring. Click! The gray mist around her began to solidify into the walls of the Blackwood Estate, then dissolved back into smoke. Before she could turn the third, the echo reached her. A massive hand, made of rusted clock hands and splintered oak, gripped her waist. The pressure was immense, but it didn't just crush her bones. It crushed her age. Where the creature touched her, Anya's skin began to wrinkle and age. Her hand, holding the dial, withered into the hand of an 80-year-old woman. You are a memory. The echo groaned, the sound vibrating through her teeth. Anya gasped, her lungs feeling heavy and tired. She looked at the third ring. Her vision was blurring with age, but she saw the final piece of the knot. With a trembling, skeletal finger, she forced the ring to turn. Click! The dial didn't just glow, it screamed. A pulse of pure white light erupted from the center of the orb, expanding in a perfect sphere. The effect was instantaneous. The echo's grip shattered. The creature let out a mechanical wail as its body began to reverse. The rusted hands became polished steel. The splintered oak turned back into green saplings. And then it vanished into nothingness. Anya felt her own body snap back. Her skin smoothed, her strength returned, and the weight of decades lifted off her shoulders. But they weren't back in the library. Anya and Finch hit a hard, cold floor. As the white light faded, Anya realized they were in a basement. But it wasn't the basement of the Blackwood Estate she had seen earlier. This place was pristine. The stone walls were new, and the air smelled of fresh lime and wet mortar. On the wall, a calendar hung from a nail. June 12th, 1894. We missed, Finch groaned, pushing himself up from the floor. He looked younger. His hair was jet black, and the lines on his face had vanished. Professor, Anya asked, her voice sounding higher, more youthful. The pulse was too strong, Finch said, looking at the dial. It was now dim, its rings locked tight. We didn't go back to the present. We went back to the house's beginning. From upstairs, they heard the heavy thud of footsteps and the sound of a man's voice, cold and commanding. Is the foundation set? The architect promised that this house would be a tomb for time itself. I want the dial sealed within the hearth before the sun sets. Anya froze. That's the man who built this place. Silas Blackwood. If he finds us here with the dial, Finch whispered, we won't just be trapped in the past. We'll become the very foundation he's building on. The basement was a labyrinth of raw stone and fresh mortar. Above them, the house groaned as the heavy Victorian beams were hammered into place. Every strike of the carpenter's mallet felt like a heartbeat in the belly of the beast. We have to move, Finch whispered, his voice crisp and young. Silas Blackwood wasn't just an aristocrat. He was a founding member of the Order of the Eternal Second. They believed that by stopping time in one location, they could live forever within its walls. They crept up the wooden skeleton of the stairs. The house was a shell. No wallpaper, no furniture, just the exposed ribs of the manor. Through the gaps in the exterior walls, Anya could see the Devon coastline of 1894. The sea was a violent, churning gray, and the air lacked the heavy, oily pollution of the modern world. In the center of what would become the Grand Library stood Silas Blackwood. He was a tall man, draped in a heavy black frock coat, holding a set of architectural plans that looked more like occult diagrams. "The resonance is perfect," Silas said to a cowering foreman. "The limestone was quarried from the Silent Valley. It will absorb the sound of the seconds. Now, bring me the heart of the machine." "Professor," Anya hissed, pulling Finch behind a stack of fresh timber. "He's looking for the dial." "Our dial." "No," Finch realized, his eyes wide. "He's looking for the dial of this time. There are two of them now. A paradox. If they touch, the reaction will be cataclysmic." The dial in Anya's pocket began to vibrate violently. It wasn't glowing violet anymore. It was turning a blistering, angry red. The metal was getting so hot it scorched her coat. "The two devices are attracting each other," Finch whispered. "Like magnets. If Silas finds us, he'll have two keys to a door that should never be opened." Suddenly, the foreman pointed toward the shadows where they were hiding. "Master Blackwood, there be someone in the timber." Silas turned. His eyes were not human. They were flat, mirrored silver, reflecting the entire room in a distorted fisheye lens. He didn't look surprised to see people in modern clothes. He looked hungry. "Ah," Silas smiled, and the sound was like glass grinding together. "Visitors from a fruit of my labor. You've come from the future, haven't you? Carrying the perfected version of my work." "Run!" Finch yelled. They bolted through the unfinished hallways. Silas didn't chase them. He simply tapped his cane on the floorboards. The house responded. The stairs began to shift, the wood grain flowing like water. A doorway that led to the kitchen suddenly warped, leading back into the library. Space was folding. "He's controlling the geometry," Anya cried as they found themselves back in the center of the room, facing Silas again. Silas held out a gloved hand. "Give it to me. Your dial has seen 100 years of echoes. It has the patina of 1 billion stolen moments. With it, I won't just stop time in this house. I will stop it for the world." Anya looked at the red-hot dial in her hand. She looked at Finch. "Professor, the knot of hours, it can be tied, but it can also be cut." "Anya, no. If you break the cycle here, you might never have been born." "But if I don't," Anya said, looking Silas in his silver eyes, "no one will ever be born again." She didn't hand the dial to Silas. Instead, she threw it with all her might toward the massive stone hearth where a fire had just been lit. Clang! The dial hit the cast iron grate. At the same moment, the foreman entered carrying a velvet box containing the 1894 version of the dial. The two devices, the old and the new, pulled toward each other with a terrifying gravitational force. They collided in mid-air over the flames. The world didn't explode. It inverted. The red light and the violet light merged into a blinding white flash. The 1894 manor house began to dissolve, the wood turning into ash, the stone into sand, and the sky into a swirling vortex of unwritten history. The sensation was no longer one of falling, but of being pulled apart and reassembled 1,000 times a second. The white flash didn't fade, it became the world. Anya felt her memories flickering like a candle in a gale. Her childhood, her university years, the face of the librarian who first taught her about archives, they were all being bleached white by the paradox. "Hold on to something." Finch's voice sounded like it was coming from a miles-deep well. Anya reached out into the void and felt a cold, jagged edge. It was a fragment of the stone hearth from 1894. Beside it, the two dials were no longer separate objects. They had fused into a singular, pulsing mass of impossible geometry, a hyperdial. The hyperdial was the center of the storm. Around it, the timeline was looping. Anya saw Silas Blackwood reaching for the device, his silver eyes cracking like mirrors. Then, a second later, she saw him being thrown back by the initial blast. Over and over, the same 3 seconds played out in a frantic, stuttering cycle. The paradox is stuck in a feedback loop. Anya yelled, her voice sounding distorted and metallic. "It's trying to decide which version of history is real." Finch scrambled toward her, his body flickering between his young 1894 self and the elderly professor she knew. The house in 1894 is fighting the house in 2024. If we don't break the loop, we'll be trapped in these 3 seconds forever. Anya looked at the hyperdial. The symbols of the knot of hours were no longer just on the rings. They were floating in the air around the device, glowing with a violent, unstable energy. Professor, the symbols. They aren't a code anymore. They're a path. She noticed that some of the floating symbols were stable, while others flickered and vanished. The stable ones formed a trail leading directly into the heart of the white light. We have to go into the dial. Anya realized. That's suicide. Finch cried. That's the singularity. The point where time is 0. It's the only place that isn't looping. Anya didn't wait for him to agree. She grabbed Finch's flickering hand and lunged toward the pulsing hyperdial. As they touched the white-hot surface of the device, the sound of the world changed. The roaring wind and the grinding gears vanished, replaced by a silence so absolute it felt like it was pressing against her eardrums. They were standing on a glass-like floor that stretched infinitely in every direction. Below the glass, they could see the entire history of the Blackwood Estate laid out like a tapestry. They saw the first stone being laid. They saw Silas Blackwood's funeral. They saw Professor Finch entering the library for the first time, and they saw Anya herself currently standing in the void. But in the center of this map of time, there was a black smudge, a hole in the tapestry. That's where Clara is, Finch whispered, falling to his knees. The echo didn't just take her to a different time. It took her to the Null Point, the place where time never began. Looking into the black hole, Anya saw a flickering blue light. A blue dress. Clara. As Anya moved toward the hole, the glass floor beneath them began to crack. The paradox was catching up. The 3-second loop from 1894 was leaking into the singularity, and the glass was beginning to reflect the screaming face of Silas Blackwood. He's coming through, Finch hissed, pointing at the cracks. He's using the paradox to claw his way into the Null Point. Silas's silver hand punched through the glass floor, his fingers elongated and sharp, vibrating with the power of 1,000 stolen years. The glass floor didn't just shatter. It splintered into shards of possibility. Each fragment showed a different version of Anya's life. One where she never became an archivist, one where she never met Finch, and one where she was currently a silver-eyed servant of Silas Blackwood. Silas hauled himself up through the rift. He was no longer a man in a frock coat. His body had become a chaotic assembly of clockwork and shadow, his silver eyes now taking up half his face. He moved with a stuttering, stop-motion gait, as if the universe was struggling to render his existence. "This is my design," Silas roared, his voice a distorted chorus of every person who had ever died within the Blackwood walls. "On you go," Finch shouted, scrambling to his feet. He looked at the black hole in the center of the glass, the Null Point. "Get to Clara. I'll hold the architect back. Professor, you can't. He'll erase you." Finch smiled, a sad, peaceful expression that Anya had never seen on him before. "He can only erase what is in time, Anya. I'm already halfway to being a memory. Go." Anya turned and dove into the black smudge. The transition was violent. She expected to fall, but instead, she felt herself being unfolded. The Null Point was a place of 0 entropy. There was no light, no sound, and no heat. It was the waiting room of the universe. In the center of the nothingness, a small, glowing lantern sat on the floor. Beside it sat Clara Finch. She was huddled in her blue dress, playing with a small wooden horse. She looked exactly as she had in the photographs, untouched by the 7 years that had passed in the world above. "Clara, on your vispert." Her voice sounded thin, like a reed. The girl looked up. Her eyes were bright, but they held the terrifying depth of someone who had seen the beginning and the end of all things. "Is it time to go home?" The ticking stopped a long time ago. "Yes," Anya said, reaching out. "Your father is waiting." But as Clara took Anya's hand, the darkness of the Null Point began to vibrate. A silver light pierced the void. Silas Blackwood had broken through. He had discarded Finch, or consumed him, and was now a towering monolith of jagged brass and silver light. Nothing escapes the circle, Silas bellowed. He raised a hand, and the darkness of the Null Point began to coalesce into a giant pendulum. It swung toward them, not through space, but through the concept of existence. If it hit them, they wouldn't just die, they would be unwritten. Anya looked at the lantern Clara was holding. It wasn't burning oil. Inside the glass was a miniature version of the Chronos Dial, spinning slowly. Clara, the lantern, give it to me. It's the only light left, the girl whispered, handing it over. Anya realized the truth. The dial wasn't just a key or a lens. In the Null Point, it was a seed. It was the potential for time to exist. She didn't need to align the rings this time. She needed to plant it. As the silver pendulum swung toward them, Anya slammed the lantern onto the floor of the void. "Let there be now," she screamed. The glass shattered. The tiny dial hit the absolute zero of the Null Point and triggered a second Big Bang, a localized explosion of pure, chronological energy. The explosion of now wasn't a fire. It was a deluge of color and sound. The Null Point, once a stagnant void, was suddenly flooded with the noise of a billion ticking seconds. The white light of the new timeline collided with Silas Blackwood's silver form, and the architect let out a sound like a cathedral collapsing. "No, my circle, my perfect, frozen world." Silas's clockwork body began to glow white-hot. His silver eyes melted, streaming down his face like liquid mercury. Anya gripped Clara's hand as the floor beneath them transformed. The black void was being paved over by memories, not just Anya's or Finch's, but the memories of everyone who had ever lived in Devon. She saw flashes of horse-drawn carriages, the construction of modern roads, and the flight of birds that hadn't been hatched yet. "Hold on," Anya yelled over the roar of 1,000 years passing in a second. Suddenly, a hand reached out of the shifting light. It was a translucent, shimmering arm. "Professor," it was Finch, but he was no longer the man she knew. He was a temporal ghost, a being woven into the very fabric of a new timeline Anya had planted. He stood between them and the disintegrating Silas Blackwood, his hands outstretched. "The seed has taken root, Anya." Finch's voice was a beautiful, echoing harmony. But a new timeline needs a foundation. It needs someone to stay behind and manage the flow. Someone to be the watcher of the knot. "Alistair, no. Come with us," Anya pleaded. "I can't. I am part of the paradox now," Finch said, looking down at Clara with a look of infinite love. "But Clara belongs to the world of the living. She is the anchor. Take her back to the library. Take her to the sun." Silas Blackwood made one final, desperate lunge. His body was now a skeleton of rusted gears, his reach clawing for the light of the new dial. "If I cannot own time, I will destroy the seconds." Finch didn't flinch. He stepped into Silas's path. When the two touched, there was no impact, only a sudden, profound silence. The architect and the professor merged into a singular pillar of gray stone. For a brief moment, Anya saw them as a statue, a man holding a clock, frozen in a struggle that would last for eternity. The pillar shattered into a million butterflies made of old parchment. The blast wave of the butterflies hit Anya and Clara. The world spun. The library of Blackwood Estate rushed toward them. Not the unfinished shell of 1894, and not the stagnant tomb of the paradox. They hit the carpeted floor of the library. The air was warm. The scent of old books was there, but so was the smell of fresh rain from an open window. Anya gasped for air, her lungs feeling the weight of real, moving time. She looked around. The shadows were normal. The clock on the wall was ticking, a steady, rhythmic tock-tock-tock. She looked down. Clara was sitting beside her, blinking in the sunlight that streamed through the dust motes. "Is it over?" Clara asked, her voice small and shaky. Anya looked at her own hands. They were her own, young, steady, and free of the silver rot. But as she stood up, she noticed the Chronos Dial lying in the center of the room. It was dead. The brass was blackened, and the rings were fused solid. It was no longer a machine. It was a heavy, cold piece of junk. But then the library door creaked open. Anya turned, expecting to see a ghost. Instead, she saw a man in a police uniform, his face etched with confusion. "Dr. Sharma? We've been looking for you for months." "And my God, is that the Finch girl?" Anya's heart stopped. "Months? How long have we been gone?" The officer looked at his watch. "You disappeared from the museum archives exactly 6 months ago, Dr. Sharma. But that's not the strange part." "What is?" The officer pointed to the window. Outside, the Blackwood Estate was gone. In its place was a lush, green forest. The house, it vanished the night you went missing. There's nothing left but a hole in the ground. Anya looked back at the library they were standing in. If the house was gone, then where were they? The police officer stood in the doorway, but he wasn't stepping into the room. It was as if there was an invisible barrier at the threshold. Behind him, the lush green forest of the Devon coast was vibrant and real, but the library where Anya and Clara stood was still draped in the heavy, velvet shadows of the 19th century. "Officer, come in. Help her," Anya cried, moving toward him. The officer's eyes widened. I can't see you clearly, doctor. You look like heat rising off a road. And the girl, she looks like a fading photograph." Anya reached out to touch the doorframe, but her hand didn't meet wood. It met a cold, vibrating surface, the same texture as the glass floor in the Null Point. She realized the truth with a sickening jolt. They weren't in the world. They were in the afterglow. The Blackwood Estate hadn't just vanished. It had been moved into a pocket of stale time. They were like a song that continues to ring in your ears after the music has stopped. "We're a resonance," Anya whispered to herself. "The house is gone, but the idea of it is still vibrating." Clara gripped Anya's hand. "Look at the floor, Anya." Beneath their feet, the library floor was beginning to turn transparent. They could see the hole in the ground the officer had mentioned. It was a massive, charred crater where the foundations had been ripped out of reality. Within that crater, thousands of silver filaments were twitching like the legs of a dying insect. The Chronos echo wasn't dead. It had simply been stripped of its physical shell. Without the house to contain it, the echo was trying to weave itself into the natural world. Suddenly, the officer's face distorted. His voice began to slow down, deepening into a mechanical growl. "Dr. Sharma, give me the second. He's being tuned." Anya screamed. The silver filaments from the crater were rising like smoke, wrapping around the officer's legs, turning his blue uniform into gray ash. The forest behind him began to flicker, the green leaves turning into jagged brass gears. Silas Blackwood's consciousness hadn't been destroyed. It had been fragmented into the very earth itself. The dial, Clara pointed at the fused, blackened sphere on the floor. "It's not dead. It's full." Anya realized the dial had absorbed the paradox, the null point energy, and the professor's final sacrifice. It was a battery of infinite temporal power, and the fragmented Silas was trying to use the officer as a straw to suck that power back out. If he gets this power, he won't just rebuild the house, Anya said, her mind racing. He'll turn the whole world into a Blackwood Estate, a world where nothing ever moves, nothing ever grows, and everyone is a frozen memory. The officer, or what was left of him, stepped forward. The invisible barrier shattered like glass. As he entered the room, the library began to grow. Walls stretched upward, bookshelves multiplied, and the ceiling vanished into a swirling vortex of silver clouds. The afterglow was expanding. Anya grabbed the fuse dial. It was incredibly heavy, feeling as though it contained the weight of a mountain. "Clara, the professor said you were the anchor. You belong to the world of the living." "I don't know how to go back," Clara cried as the silver filaments reached for her ankles. "You have to remember the future," Anya shouted. "The echo feeds on the past and regrets. You have to think about the things you haven't done yet, the birthdays you haven't had, the books you haven't read." Anya held the dial above her head. She knew what she had to do. The dial needed to be grounded. It needed to be discharged into something that could absorb the weight of centuries. She looked at the officer, whose face was now a mirror of Silas Blackwood's silver eyes. He lunged for the device. Anya didn't pull away. She slammed the dial into the transparent floor, aiming directly for the knot of hours symbol that was etched into the very bedrock of the crater below. This is for Alistair. The dial hit the bedrock. The fused metal didn't break, it dissolved. The concentrated time inside the device poured into the earth like liquid lightning. The effect was cataclysmic. The silver filaments exploded into white light. The afterglow library began to tear apart, the books turning into birds and flying into the sun. But as the world dissolved around them, Anya felt a cold hand grab her hair. The echo, a shadow of Silas, was pulling her back into the dissolving library. If I vanish, you vanish with me. Anya felt herself being dragged into the widening void. She looked at Clara, who was floating toward the green forest, her body becoming solid and real as she remembered her future. Go, Clara. Live. Anya was swallowed by the white. The white void was not empty. It was a pressurized silence, a realm of pure information where every second Anya had ever lived existed as a single, glowing thread. She felt herself stretching, her consciousness expanding until she could see the entire knot of hours from the outside. Silas Blackwood's shadow, the echo, was still there, a ragged stain of gray against the brilliance. But without the dial, he was nothing but a fading scream. You cannot end. The shadow hissed, its form flickering like a dying candle. Time is a circle. No. Anya's voice resonated through the void, sounding like a choir. Time is a story, and every story needs an ending. She reached out and grasped the gray shadow. As she touched it, she poured her own memories into him. Not the regrets he fed on, but the mundane, beautiful chaos of a life truly lived. The smell of rain on hot asphalt, the taste of a first cup of coffee, the frustration of a missed bus. The echo couldn't handle the weight of real, entropic time. The silver gears of Silas's heart seized, rusted instantly, and crumbled into fine white sand. The architect was gone, not killed, but simply finished. Anya felt herself fading. The white light was pulling her toward the long sleep of the timeline. She closed her eyes, ready to become just another thread in the tapestry. Anya, wake up. The voice was familiar. It wasn't the echo, and it wasn't the professor. It was a heartbeat. Anya opened her eyes. She wasn't in the void. She was lying on damp grass. The air was filled with the scent of pine and salt. The sun was warm on her face. She sat up, gasping. She was in the middle of a forest, the same forest the officer had seen. The crater of the Blackwood Estate was gone, replaced by a peaceful meadow. Sitting a few feet away, leaning against an ancient oak tree, was Clara Finch. Clara looked different. She wasn't the little girl in the blue dress anymore. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, wearing modern clothes, a denim jacket and boots. Her eyes, once filled with the depth of the void, were now clear and bright. Clara, Anya whispered. Ow, how long has it been? Clara smiled, and it was a smile that carried the weight of years. For the world, it's been 10 minutes since you grounded the dial. But for me, the timeline reset. When you planted that seed, the universe had to fill the gap. I grew up, Anya. I lived those 7 years I lost, but in a world where the Blackwood Estate never existed. Anya looked at her own hands. They were solid. And the professor? Alistair. Clara's expression softened. She reached in her pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished brass key. He's where he always wanted to be. He's the watcher. He's the reason the forest is green and the birds are singing. He's the one who kept the door open for you to come back. Anya stood up, her legs shaky. She looked toward the center of the meadow. There, barely visible under the tall grass, was a single stone tablet. It wasn't a gravestone. It was a marker. She walked over and brushed away the moss. On the stone, carved in deep, elegant letters, were the words, "Time is the longest distance between two people, but love is the frequency that finds the way home." Beneath the inscription was the knot of hours symbol, but it was no longer jagged or glowing. It was a simple, closed loop, a symbol of peace. "What do we do now?" Clara asked, standing beside her. Anya looked back at the forest, then toward the distant road where the sirens of the rescue teams were finally getting louder. She felt a strange weight in her pocket. She reached in and pulled out a small glass shard, a fragment of the floor from the Null Point. Inside the glass, a tiny, glowing spark remained. "We do what we've always done, Clara," Anya said, a small smile forming on her lips. "We keep the records. We make sure the world remembers that every second is a gift, and every silence is a story waiting to be told." As they walked toward the road, the glass shard in Anya's hand flickered once, in rhythm with her heartbeat. Somewhere in the fabric of reality, a clock struck 13, not as a warning, but as a greeting to a world that was finally, truly moving forward.